Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are at the time of day that you are watching and joining us, me specifically. Today, I have two angels watching over me off the back of my corner, right? As we look at now lecture 8. Lecture 8 is going to cover John chapter 7. And in John 7, we have an interesting opportunity because many individuals, beginning back in the 1930s even, identified John as a Greek drama or type of Greek drama. And the characterization in John is very much like a stage layout. Rarely do you have more than two people on stage at any time. And there are various crowd groups. So in John 7, we have Jesus who speaks. We have the crowd who speaks, sometimes in a unified voice, sometimes in a divisive voice. We have a group of Jews, sometimes called Pharisees. Then we have Nicodemus who participates. And then we have Jesus' brothers at the beginning. And later we have the guards of the Pharisees who have been sent to listen to Jesus and bring him back. So it's very easy to portray this as a dramatic reading, which is quite interesting if you ever do that. There is a translation of the Bible. I believe it's complete Bible now. The New Testament is the one I have, of the Voice translation. And it is created not with as much Jesus answered and said to them, da, 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 but simply Jesus and then Jesus' words. So it's like reading a script. It's very interesting and very dynamic. So that's an opportunity for expanding how you've heard John 7 before. We're now going to look at the outline, which is how we normally start. And because of the various characters, there's a lot more stage movement. So we have a lot more elements. So the story begins with it's time to go up to the feast. We'll talk about that in a moment. Verses 1 through 13. And then in chapter 14, verse 14, all the way through 24, Jesus is teaching. And the question is, who is Jesus's own teacher? 25 through 27, there is a response by the people or the crowd. Verses 28 through 29, Jesus is again teaching, and the question is, where is he from? A theme that resonates in various parts of John's gospel. Verses 30 and 31, the people respond, but this time they are divided. So we have crowd A and crowd B. Verse 32 is a response by the Pharisees to this, and they send guards to bring Jesus to them. 33 and 34, Jesus is teaching once again. The question is, where is Jesus going? So we have, who is Jesus' teacher? Where is Jesus from? And now, where is Jesus going? Verses 35 and 36, a response by a group called the Jews. 37 through 39, Jesus is teaching again, believe in me. Verses 40 and 4 through 44, the people are divided once again. 45 and 46, the Pharisees respond when the guards return without Jesus. And then in 47 through 52, the Pharisees themselves are divided. Well, conflict has arisen. Conflict has arisen. Beginning in John chapter 5, we have increasing levels of conflict, even when Jesus is not in Jerusalem. And so we see that in the outline. Jesus' teaching is a challenge. It's what's being paid attention to. Now they're paying attention to his words, which is a good thing. Not so much the signs, even though those are still a problem. So when we look at the structure of John 7, he starts in Galilee, and in verse 52 seems to end up in Galilee. So if we look at that, verse 1. After these things, we talked about that in John 6, is a very standard type of Johannine entrance to a new part of the story. So in John, pretty much the chapters do start in a good place because of after these things. So what happened? And now it's time for something new. Jesus was walking in Galilee, for he was unwilling to walk into Judea because the Jews were seeking to kill him. Well, that's from chapter 5, right? And we'll see ties with chapter 5 here. So we have chapter 5 as a feast, and now it's another feast. And then if we go to the end of John chapter 7, in verse 52, which is not quite the end of 7, but very close, right? There's the mention of towards Nicodemus, are you also from Galilee? There no prophet has ever come from Galilee. And so we have Galilee wrapping this theme as, where is Jesus from? What is his teaching? And do the Jews really want to kill him in Judea? And it seems that perhaps they might want to do that. Another structure is the question of being astray. In John chapter 7, verse 12, the question is, Jesus, the people are looking for Jesus, and there's grumbling, like in John 6. And there's some are saying, he's a good man, but others, no, he's not. He leads the people astray. And that's the question, is Jesus leading them astray? And then we have down in verse 47, another reference to that. And the Pharisees ask the guards who have returned sans Jesus, without Jesus, they ask the question, you have not also been led astray, have you? And that's one of those weird kind of Greek sentences. But the question is Jesus someone to follow, or is Jesus leading the people astray? So we have Galilee and the idea of Jesus from Galilee, wrapping the story up, beginning and end, and then we have this idea of Jesus being perhaps led astray. So what are some of the themes? Because in this particular gospel, in this particular chapter, we see some new themes rising up. One of the first is the idea of secret or hidden, right? The Greek word is crypto, something that's hidden, cryptic. We get that word. Jesus' brothers tell him he needs to go to Judea. He says, no one does anything in secret when he himself seeks to be known publicly. Now, I excuse the sudden lighting change, but it is time for my computer screen to go into less blue light so I can sleep. Yes, that's what caused that little shading happening. Sorry about that. Guess it's not too bad a deal. Makes the angels stand out better. Isn't that beautiful? There's one there and one over there. This is at a Franciscan church in Vienna. It's a beautiful, beautiful church down by the Donau Canal. It's beautiful, beautiful church. So going on back to this. So the brothers are going, Jesus, you have to get out in public so that people know who you are and what you're doing. But the brothers didn't yet believe in him, as it says in verse 5. And that causes us to think about John 2. They were at the wedding at Cana. Yeah, they didn't quite believe there. And then Jesus, in verse 10, goes up as if in secret. So he doesn't follow the crowds. He's not with his disciples. He's not making a big deal. He's not blowing horns and sounding trumpets that he is here. He's just there. And the people are looking for him because they expect him to be there. He is a very popular person. He is a Jewish male. He is expected to attend the festivals. And he's already been there in John 5. And then we have the Passover that he was in there in John 2. So he's been at Passover, what we think might be Pentecost, and now this is the festival of booths or tabernacles, which is in the fall. So these things perhaps could be in 1 year. At least that's what some commentaries think, that John's kind of misaligned itself, but it hasn't. So this is likely 1 year later, right? Because chapter 5 is probably a summer festival, then John 6 is Passover, which is the next spring, and then probably the next fall when this is being accounted for. But he goes up hidden, right? Not publicly. And that's what the idea of secret means. It's not that he's trying to keep from being seen, because he doesn't do a very good job of that. He starts teaching and whoa, his identity has been made known. But the key that we find in John 7 now is a turn to his teaching. That's set up for us in John chapter 6, when many disciples stopped following him because his teaching about being the bread of life, the bread of heaven, is too hard. But Peter says, you are what? The Holy One of Israel, right? Before that, you have the words of eternal life. Your words, your teaching is important. And John wants to emphasize that the teaching is incredibly important. So we see that coming in from Peter in John 6, 68 and 69. We see that in John 6:59, where he is teaching in Capernaum. So teaching has become a little bit more important. And then in verse 14, it was in the middle of the feast. So these large feasts were 8 or 7 days long. And if you have Passover, it's an 8-day celebration. So it's a lengthy time. So 3 days in, he really hasn't stepped forward. But now, in the middle of the festival, he begins to teach into the temple. Well, we've already talked about the temple. In this picture that you're seeing, I appear to be inside of this chapel, but it's just photographic mystery and magic. But the temple is a large platform. And yes, he would be inside the boundaries of the temple, but we might better say he was at the temple, because then there were the inner courts, and then there was the place where the Holy of Holies was, which was included. And sometimes we think of into, we think of indoors, we think of being under a roof. And that's not likely the case on this huge platform of the Temple Mount, as they call it, that had been under construction, as we know from John 2, for 46 years, since Herod began this reconstruction to honor the emperor with this tremendous temple. So he begins to teach in verse 14. And then in verse 28, right? He cries out in the temple, at the temple, probably, teaching and saying, you know who I am and you know where I'm from. Sort of, maybe, possibly, Galilee? Oh, John can be confusing about this question. We know he's from above, but the people don't always know that. And then we have in verse 35, once again, right? Where does this man intend to go? Is he going to the diaspora? Is he leaving Judea? Is he going to teach the Greeks? Oh, no. That would make him unclean. We can't be doing that. So teaching is a major, major theme in this passage. And the question is, are they actually listening to his teaching? We'll find out. We'll find out. But here's the problem. Death lurks around the corner. Right? Verse 1, the narrator, the evangelist, tells us that Jesus does not want to go to Judea because the Jews are seeking to kill him. Then we have once again in verse 19, right, where Jesus says, why do you seek to kill me? And the crowd's going, what? Who is looking forward to kill you? Right? Are you crazy? Well, we know from earlier in the text, back in John 5, that they are looking to kill him because he's making himself equal to God. And the Pharisees are on the look for him, and a lot of people are looking out for him. And then in verse 25, some of the people of Jerusalem are saying, isn't this the guy they're seeking to kill? Well, some of the crowd is not informed. Other is. It's a large place. It's like 1,800 by 1,500 feet, I think. 1,800 feet by 1,500 feet. 1,800 feet is 6 football lengths long. 1,500 feet would be 5 football lengths long, wide. Wow. That's a lot. That's a lot of space when you think about how big the Super Bowl is and how many people could fit into that place. And they expected, the crowds came and they were numbering those close to 100,000 people in and around Jerusalem. They weren't all in the temple at one time, but it was crowded. And what happened on the east side may not have been known about on the west side. So are they trying to kill Jesus? That's the question. And it would appear that they are. But some of the crowd does not know it. They think Jesus is paranoid, but others know that he's not. And then we have the crowd, the people, the voices that are spoken from a distance, and how they respond to Jesus. He starts teaching in, right, verse 14, but he's there for a couple of days. And the crowd, right, is grumbling. They don't know what to think about Jesus. They're divided. Yes, he's a good man. He's working signs and miracles. And no, he's leading the people astray. But they were keeping it quiet because of the Jews. The Jewish leaders in charge of the temple is most likely what's being referred to by that particular title, because the crowd are Jews. So you can't like keep it quiet for the Jews when you're a Jew doing the talking. So one of the challenges we have in the gospel is how do we represent this idea without being anti-Semitic? And it's not. It's most likely at this point regarding to people who are responsible for the peace in the temple. So Levites, Sadducee priests, and others. But they're not the only ones. They're not the only ones. Verse 20, right? The crowd comes back and are responding to Jesus' teaching, going, you're demonic possessed. Who's looking to kill you? Nobody's looking to kill you. Look at this. We're at the temple. They're the ones who are not informed. So perhaps we should not pay attention to them. And so the crowd is an important thread through John 7 and even John 8. In verse 31 and 32, right? Many of the crowd believed in him. What? Many of the crowd believed in him. When the Christ comes, will he do more than this? More signs? Is that possible? And the Pharisees start to hear. So now we have a different group within Judaism. These are the ones responsible for teaching. And they're wondering about the teaching of this man and his pedigree, whether he's qualified to teach. Some people wonder if I'm qualified to teach. I put in a lot of time studying. So yeah, I think I am. But you can be the determining factor. If you watch these and like them, then maybe I am. Thank you. You can even contact me via email. I'm easy to find. I'm the only Stan Harstein I know of in the entire globe. So type in Stan Harstein, you're likely to find me. And then we get later in the story, down in verse 40, some of the people, i.e. the crowd, were saying, this is the prophet. The prophet, the one about Moses, whom Moses spoke. But others said, no, he's the Messiah. And others, can't be the Messiah. Messiah is not from Galilee. Oh, there it is again. Beginning, middle, end. Okay. And the crowd is divided because of him. They don't know what to think. They don't know what to say. They don't know about his teaching. And finally, we have the Pharisees, right? None of the rulers or Pharisees has believed in him, has he? That's what they say, but it's not quite true. Kind of ironic. And the crowd is accursed. They don't know the law. They're not smart enough. Not a very good opinion of the leaders about these people who are around them and surrounding them. But they don't spend all their life studying Torah. They come to the festivals because that's what they've been taught to do. They come to engage in what it means to be Jewish in the first century. But the Pharisees study every day and try to maintain a level of ritual purity all the time and follow the teaching of commands and the commands of other rabbis who have taught things. So those are some of the major themes. We have one more that we're going to talk about, but we're going to come back in the next section so that this video doesn't get too particularly long. So we will be back soon.